Welcome to our channel. The Vikings are often portrayed as fearless warriors and skilled sailors who explored and conquered vast territories. However, their history is also filled with dark and brutal practices that are less celebrated. In this video, we will uncover some of the most sinister and disturbing aspects of Viking culture. From human sacrifices to ruthless raids, here are the top dark things that Vikings did in ancient history. 1. Human sacrifice. One of the most chilling aspects of Viking culture was their practice of human sacrifice. The Vikings believed that offering human lives to the gods would ensure victory in battle, good harvests, and favorable weather. Sacrifices were often carried out during religious ceremonies, such as the blot, where slaves, prisoners of war, or even willing volunteers were killed in honor of gods like Odin and Thor. The most infamous of these rituals was the blood eagle, a method of execution where the victim's back was cut open, and their lungs were pulled out to resemble wings. Though the historical accuracy of the blood eagle is debated, it remains one of the most gruesome legends associated with the Vikings. 2. Viking raids. The Viking raids were not just about plundering wealth, they were acts of terror designed to instill fear and assert dominance. These raids often targeted monasteries and churches, which were seen as easy prey due to their wealth and lack of defense. The Vikings would slaughter anyone who resisted, and survivors were often taken as slaves. The most notorious of these raids was the attack on Lindisfarne in 793 AD, which marked the beginning of the Viking Age. This brutal assault shocked the Christian world and set the tone for centuries of Viking incursions across Europe. 3. Slavery and the thrall system. Slavery was a central part of Viking society, and thralls, slaves, were the lowest class in the social hierarchy. Thralls were captured during raids or born into slavery and were often subjected to harsh treatment. They were forced to perform grueling labor, such as farming, building, and even accompanying their masters on raids. Slaves had no legal rights and were considered the property of their owners, who could buy, sell, or even kill them at will. The Viking slave trade was extensive, with markets throughout Europe where thralls were bought and sold. 4. Rituals of death and burial. Viking burial practices were steeped in superstition and often involved elaborate rituals designed to ensure the deceased's passage to the afterlife. One of the darkest aspects of these rituals was the sacrifice of slaves and animals to accompany the deceased. In some cases, the wife or concubine of a deceased chieftain would be forced to join him in death, a practice known as suttee. The dead were sometimes buried in ships, along with their most prized possessions, and in some cases, with human and animal sacrifices. The famous Oseberg ship burial in Norway is one such example, where 2 women were buried along with a rich assortment of goods and animals. 5. Infanticide and child sacrifice. Infanticide was a grim reality in Viking society, often practiced to control population and ensure the survival of the fittest. Children born with deformities or in times of famine were sometimes abandoned or killed. This practice was known as exposure, where unwanted infants were left in the wilderness to die from exposure to the elements or wild animals. While this was a common practice in many ancient cultures, it adds to the dark legacy of the Vikings. 6. Viking berserkers. The Viking berserkers were legendary warriors known for their uncontrollable rage and frenzied fighting style. These warriors would enter battle in a trance-like fury, often fighting without armor and showing no regard for their own safety. The term berserk comes from the Old Norse words ber, meaning bear, and serker, meaning shirt, reflecting their habit of fighting without protective clothing. Berserkers were believed to be possessed by the spirit of animals such as bears or wolves, which gave them their extraordinary strength and fearlessness. However, their uncontrollable rage often led to brutal and indiscriminate violence, making them feared even among their own people. 7. Cannibalism. Though not as widely documented as other practices, there are accounts suggesting that some Viking groups may have resorted to cannibalism, particularly during times of extreme hardship or famine. While this is not a common or well-established aspect of Viking culture, it adds another layer of darkness to their history. In some cases, ritual cannibalism may have been practiced as a way to absorb the strength or spirit of a defeated enemy, though this is more speculative. 8. Danelaw and conquest. When the Vikings conquered parts of England, establishing what was known as the Danelaw, they imposed their own laws and customs on the local population. The Viking rulers often dealt harshly with any resistance, using executions and brutal punishments to maintain control. The Viking occupation led to significant cultural and political changes in the region, but it also brought violence, oppression, and fear to the Anglo-Saxon population. 9. Viking witchcraft and sire was a form of Norse magic practiced by both men and women, though it was particularly associated with women known as vulvas. This form of witchcraft involved rituals and spells to manipulate the elements, control fate, and communicate with the spirits. Some Viking leaders employed sire practitioners to curse their enemies or ensure victory in battle. However, those who practiced sire were often feared and persecuted, especially in later periods when Christianity began to take hold in Viking societies. 10. Terror tactics and psychological warfare. The Vikings were masters of psychological warfare, using terror tactics to intimidate and demoralize their enemies. They would often exaggerate their brutality, spreading stories of their ruthless behavior to instill fear in those they intended to conquer. The sight of a Viking longship on the horizon was enough to send villages into panic, with people fleeing or surrendering without a fight. This reputation for cruelty was a deliberate strategy that allowed the Vikings to conquer vast territories with relatively small forces. And there you have it, the top dark and disturbing things that Vikings did in ancient history. While the Vikings are often celebrated for their exploration and warrior spirit, it's important to remember the darker aspects of their culture as well. These practices and beliefs paint a more complex and sometimes terrifying picture of the Viking Age. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into history's most fascinating and fearsome cultures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.